Hello and welcome to this brief video description of a research study that we published back in 2018, Student Mental Health, the Roles and Experiences of Academics, which was published by Student Minds and is available open access on the Student Minds website if you would like to read more. This was a piece of work which we published at that time because there were a number of kind of questions that were coming up across the sector at that time that we really needed to ask in order to really understand what a whole university approach to mental health was going to be like. So we knew from the research generally at that time that students who experience problems with their mental health don't necessarily access formal support for services. In fact, some of the research was suggesting only about a third of students who need support actually then access it. But we were also seeing at that time, particularly, were universities starting to position their academic staff as being part of the answer, and particularly saying, well, we're providing personal tutors, and that's part of our answer to the needs of students for more support around their mental health. But there was no real clear idea about what that role was, how academics would be working to support students, what preparation they would have, and whether that was appropriate. And really no clarity about how well prepared academics were or how supported they felt to actually be able to respond to student presentations, or indeed what presentations they were already responding to. So the key questions that this research then considered is, first of all, what role are academics playing in relation to student well-being? What role are they already playing? What's already happening? Secondly, what mental health issues are actually presenting to academic staff? Is it just exam nerves or writer's block or little bits of anxiety, or actually is it something more significant and serious than that? Do the academic members of staff who are then working with students feel prepared and supported to respond to those things that are presenting to them? And what aspects of the academic role are working really well in supporting students? And where actually is that getting in the way? Where is it not working? And what do we need to do about all of that? So those are the questions that we wanted to consider in this research. So this was a qualitative piece of work. We interviewed 54 academics, 18 through interview, 18 were selected to engage in one-to-one interviews, the rest in focus groups. The qualitative research obviously is not meant to be representative, but we wanted to capture a broad spread of voices. So we interviewed academics who were teaching fellows, directors of board of study, senior, and also lecturers who were relatively new to post, who had only been in for a year or so. And we also went to 5 very different institutions. So there was a spread here between Russell Group, Red Brick, Post 92, universities that had one campus, universities that had multiple campuses, large, medium, small, and a bit of a spread across England and sort of in the Midlands, North and South, and one university that was in London, because obviously London is a very specific environment. So the key findings of the research that we published were, first of all, it would appear that responding to student mental health problems has become an inevitable part of academics' role. It's just something that is presenting to those academics who are in that frontline teaching role. But many of the academics that we spoke to, in fact, virtually all of them, said that they don't feel prepared. They don't feel that they have the skills, the insight, and the knowledge to actually be able to respond to the issues that we're presenting to them. And in some cases, academics were reporting having to respond to really difficult, quite complex, and in some cases, really quite distressing presentations that they really didn't feel equipped to respond to appropriately. Also very clear that there was no real clear sense about what that academic role was supposed to be. There was real ambiguity, real lack of clarity, and that then led to weak boundaries and uncertain boundaries, both for the academics and for their students. Neither were sure what those boundaries should be, and that then led to increased risks to students, staff, and to the universities themselves. And maintaining those boundaries, even if academics had a sense of what they were, was much more difficult for academic staff than it might be, say, for student services staff, because in student services, you have a reception, you have to go through a process to access a member of staff. Whereas with academic staff, they're there at the end of class, they're there in their offices, and they're there for tutorials, and students are much more able to access them and seek more support from them. And very importantly, alongside all of this, was that many of the academics that we interviewed felt that this was a kind of an invisible piece of their work. It was an invisible part of their role, that it wasn't recognized or seen by universities. It wasn't recognized in workload planning. And so it was an additional piece of labor, that the kind of emotional labor that sat alongside all of the other work they were already doing. As we kind of then developed those conversations, it also became quite clear that signposting is a really complex and nuanced task. It's not a simple task. It's not easy for academics to necessarily just point to student services or other support that's around and say, well, go there, because quite often students don't want to. They're not keen to. They want to keep working with the academic because they know them. They want to keep talking to them. And also sometimes students don't really believe that that support is going to be helpful to them, or that there are waiting lists that are going to get in the way. And so they keep coming back to the academic. So actually effectively signposting was actually quite a challenging task. And we can't automatically assume that the abilities that academics need to be able to respond to these circumstances actually exist or are there within the academic themselves. Also particularly clear that when student services were unable to meet student need for support, whether this is because of waiting lists, for instance, and that came up a lot, then academics were stepping in to provide that cover. So while students were waiting for their first appointment, were waiting to see somebody in student services, they were getting ongoing support from their academics. Clear that there was a problematic relationship for the academics with student services. In many cases, they were unaware of what student services offered, how to contact them, and there were clear gaps between academic members of staff and student services staff, and students were clearly falling into those gaps and not getting the support they needed as a result. And we also could see very clearly from the interviews and focus groups that we did that for many of the academics that we talked to, responding to those presentations of student mental health, for quite a number had a substantive negative impact on their own well-being. And they described impacts on sleep, on work-life balance, and on their own emotional well-being overall. The implications of all of this, well, we published 12 recommendations for the sector, and I would encourage you to go and look at those. But among the key messages that come out of all of that are, first of all, that we as universities, we've got to start recognizing that academics are playing this role. It's not going to go away quickly, and so we have to start planning for it and thinking about it in our workload planning, in the training we provide to staff, in the management support that we provide, and so on. We need much better understanding of what that academic role is and should be and can be, so that it's more clearly defined for both staff and students, so that there are clear boundaries there that are then able to be maintained in order to keep everyone safe. And we absolutely need to be bringing those two universes of the academic world and the student services world together, so that both are able to work together and collaborate together more, because when that happens, then students are much more likely to get the support that they need. Also really important coming out of this research was that when students are unable to access support in student services for whatever reason, and very often it was because of waiting lists, they don't go elsewhere outside the institution. They turn inward within the institution and they seek support elsewhere. This could be from academic staff, but we've also seen in research around halls of residence, for instance, students seeking support from halls of residence staff, so that actually that need for support just goes elsewhere within the university and then ends up with a member of staff who's perhaps not prepared or trained or experienced to actually be able to respond to it appropriately. There are also, I think, some positive opportunities to actually help academic staff have a positive impact on student well-being through their day-to-day job, through the way in which they teach and assess and engage with students in the classroom. And if you want to read more about all of that, as I said, the report is open access and available on the Student Minds website. And you can read the full report or the executive summary at the beginning, or the 12 recommendations that we make at the end for things that we need to consider and think about in terms of the academic role, and how it can be better put to use to support student mental health, and how we can better put boundaries in place, more clearly define the role, and overall ensure that students and staff are being protected much more. I hope you enjoyed this brief presentation and you get a chance to read the report and enjoy the rest of the Library of Learning. Thank you.